everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Pittsburgh Sports Castle Podcast. We are back just in time for another live sport to take center stage in the city of Pittsburgh. We have baseball coming back. Joining me to talk about baseball are Cody Flavell. I knew I was going to mess that up. And Antonio Wolfe. How are you guys doing tonight?
Wonderful. It's very, very exciting to have baseball back. Obviously, as we're recording this right now, we're watching a rain-delayed Yankees-Nationals game, patiently awaiting the Giants and Dodgers to start. But it's just good to have sports back. Not that there weren't already. I know Rachel's a big soccer fan, and there's some golf going on, and NASCAR and everything. But other than that, I mean, it is good to have one of the major sports back. And obviously, hockey will be following with some basketball soon thereafter, and hopefully we get a full NFL season as well.
Antonio, how you doing?
I mean, what's not to love about baseball coming back? We get a rain delay, we get a Stanton home run, we get a Kershaw injury all on the first night. It's like COVID never happened. What's really changed if we got those three things going on first day of the season? So happy to be back, and it feels like start of April.
Well, I think a good segue is that in our MLS world, we like to, and even NWSL, we say that chaos happens a lot. So maybe we're passing that on to baseball a little bit, giving you guys some of our chaos to lighten the load. But real quick before we dive into baseball, we got to talk a little bit about soccer. The Pittsburgh Riverhounds had two really, really close games this week, and I don't mean close by the scoreline. I mean close within the proximity of each other. They played last Saturday, I believe, against the Philadelphia Union 2. They were formerly Bethlehem Steel FC, which is Pittsburgh's rival, because Harrisburg does not have a team anymore. So they absolutely creamed Philadelphia 6-0. And, I got to call out my friend JT Tannenwall for a minute, who covers the Philadelphia Union, because he was giving me crap about the game and saying, oh, well, Philadelphia just had all their young players there. But we don't get to celebrate 6 goals in Pittsburgh a lot. So we're going to celebrate it. Really, really great day by Kenny Forbes, King Kenny, if you will. He had 3 assists on the day. Anthony Velarde has scored in every single game up until that point, at least, that the Riverhounds had played. Steven Dos Santos, he got his first minutes of action this season after coming back from a bit of a knock. So good to see him get on the board twice within 6 minutes, but it was a good win. Obviously, it's huge for confidence. It's huge for the standings, because I think what people don't remember, and this was a huge thing with the U.S. women's national team beating Thailand 13-0 in the World Cup, is that you need to have goals when you're playing in a tournament-like setting, because if the Riverhounds tie with points with someone, that goal differential could be the difference in them maybe getting first place, whereas they could have been in second place. So a big 6-0 win. And then they had a game this past Wednesday against Indy 11, who's kind of become almost like their new rival, if you will. There's always a close one. Little bit of a controversial play in the first half. There was a corner kick. It looked like the ball went over the line. The referee said it did not. There is no VAR right now in the USL Championship, so it did not go to any sort of video review, and it was a no goal for the Riverhounds. Quite a bit of an unrest there, especially with our friends in the Steel Army. But in the 97th minute of stoppage time, Tyler Pasher of Indy 11, he scored the game-winning goal for them. Honestly, it was a really good play. You have to give credit where credit is due, so good for him for scoring that. But it's Pittsburgh's first loss of 2020 after picking up 2 big wins against Louisville and against Philadelphia. So a lot to learn from on that front, and they will bounce back now this Sunday against the New York Red Bulls too, another tough opponent, another affiliate with an MLS club. So looking forward to see what they do. That's going to be at 5 p.m. and that should be on The Point, 22 The Point. So be sure to look out for that. Riverhounds and New York Red Bulls. But guys, let's get into baseball. I'm pretty much going to do what I did with Owen, last week, I'm going to guide you guys, but this is your time to shine because you guys know about baseball and I know about soccer. And after covering 3 tournaments, I'm just downright tired. So I want you guys, we're going to start with the Pittsburgh Pirates lineup coming up. We've got Gregory Polanco out because he tested positive for COVID-19. So first and foremost, all the best to him. Hope it's nothing too serious and I hope he's able to recover. But what does that loss of Polanco and where do these young guys like Tucker and Hayes fit into the Pirate system?
Sure. And when I saw that we were going to be talking about Polanco, I wanted to bring something up to you guys. I was actually at Pirate Fest, I believe it was in January, before COVID, before any of this stuff was going on. And the first warning signs and the first red flags I saw was there was a table of 50% off merchandise. And it had people on there like Dickerson, Cervelli, Melky Cabrera, all guys that are, of course, not on the team anymore. And sitting right next to him, 50% off, was a Gregory Polanco signed memorabilia. So that was sort of a red flag I thought would get more media attention, that the team was kind of writing them off already. And then furthermore, into this whole quarantine, there were some 65% off deals on the Pirates merchandise website. And right next to the Cervelli and the Dickerson jerseys were Gregory Polanco. So I don't know if they were writing him off already. I don't know where he fits in this organization. I don't know what's going on with him, but obviously we will not see him to start the year. And I was curious, Cody, if we just wanted to walk through what we think this lineup's going to look like from top to bottom. I'm not even sure we have a set leadoff guy. If you want to take it from there.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think, you look at last season. I think Kevin Newman's probably going to be your leadoff hitter. I mean, really, they could go anywhere with it. I think you're probably going to see maybe Reynolds second. He could even hit third. I mean, there's so much they could do. I know the lineup yesterday, if I remember correctly, I didn't get to watch the game, but they went, Newman, Reynolds, I think Frazier batted third. Bell was fourth. What do you guys remember the rest of the lineup? I didn't get to see much of the game.
I don't. I'll be honest. I'm the kind of guy, I think I'd even say college sports and professionals, where I don't pay much attention to the minor leagues. I don't pay too much attention to draft. When it comes to college sports recruits, I'm a get me on opening day kind of guy. Let me see what they do from there. I hope that's the case with the Pirates because they were terrible in spring training. A really terrible record with all of their exhibition games. So I'm hoping they follow sort of my view on preseason and they just kind of write it off and hopefully get some small victories with some of their guys like Josh Bell hitting 2 home runs against the Indians. Mm-hmm. I agree we're probably going to see Kevin Newman. And then maybe Jared Dyson will surprise us all. That was an off-season signing that he didn't want to – it didn't seem like he wanted to be here. Mm-hmm. Maybe we'll start to see some early action from him with the Polanco injury. Cody, where do you think we're going to get any sort of power? Aside from Bell, of course.
I feel like the obvious answer is Josh Bell. I want to believe that if Gregory Polanco had been healthy, I mean, there is a lot of potential in that bat. It does play. Other than that, last season, I think, what did they hit? 163 home runs in 162 games. So they barely averaged a home run a game in a season where home runs were being hit at an astronomical pace.
Yep.
The roster hasn't changed much over the course of, the offseason and everything. So they really didn't add any pieces that are going to infuse any more power. You look at guys like, I'm a little bit higher on Jacob Stallings than a lot of people just because I like his defense. He's one of the best defensive catchers in baseball, I think you could argue. I know it's a bold statement, but when you look at, his pitch framing and a lot of the things that he does just defensively, he's not going to hit for much power. He might not hit much at all. He is a 262 career hitter, I believe. So, the batting average is a little bit better than I think people realize. He's a big-time singles hitter. You're not going to get much more than that out of him. But when you look at the landscape of catchers around the league, I don't think there's a ton of vastly good offensive options. And not that Jacob Stallings really is, but in the grand scheme of things, I think that Jacob Stallings is going to be better than people want to give him credit for, just as far as the pitching side of it goes. But I know we're still talking about the lineup. I think something that's interesting, and I want to get your thoughts on this too, with Cole Tucker. I mean, he doesn't really have a spot right now. Obviously, they're going with a Frazier Newman infield. I think they want to get Tucker into the lineup. He did play a little bit of outfield here in the spring training 2.0. Do you see that being something that continues, or do you believe that at the end of the day, maybe a Frazier is sold at some point towards the trade deadline and they can get Tucker into, an everyday role? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and that is something where we might have to even change our thinking, as I'm sure you are as well, a lifelong National League fan. So it's something we got to consider with the DH. I'd love to see Bell take over the DH role because he's had his issues at first, but honestly, he's come around a lot more than I think Adam Frazier has. I know he was a Gold Glove finalist, but I kind of see Frazier as sort of like what Neil Walker was, where, yeah, he's not making many errors, but that's because he's not making many great plays. Neil Walker always got to the plays he could get to. I feel the same with Adam Frazier. So we got to look at, I guess, who's going to use up that DH spot. Cole Tucker does not fit the mold of like a normal DH. He's not very big. He's not going to hit for power. So I wouldn't mind seeing him in the outfield. Also, they're talking about Jose Osuna being in the DH spot. He has not impressed me since, I think, his first month he was up here. First month, he was getting a lot of buzz. They said he was one of the best defensive third basemen in the system. He had a lot of power, and he just has not impressed me. To not keep on the negative, because I don't want to be the negative guy tonight, especially before the season even starts, I totally agree with you with Jacob Stallings. I'm high on him. I think there is very little depth as far as catchers across the league. And to have someone who is showing the ability to hit and the ability to pitch frame, I think it mirrors similar to when we had a Russell Martin right in the middle of the order that could give a pop to this lineup. I just want to be positive. I just see so few positives in the lineup. But I agree that Stallings will be a bright spot, and Josh Bell will be a bright spot, and possibly Adam Frazier.
Another thing I wanted to add on Stallings, I personally believe that Jacob Stallings could be in the running for a Gold Glove at the catcher spot. I mean, just he's exceptional defensively. Like I said, you're not going to get a ton of offensive production out of him. He'll hit probably, anywhere between 240 and 260. He'll put up a slash line that's nothing impressive, but at the end of the day, I mean, I think that, I wrote an article for today that kind of went over the storylines heading into the season. I mentioned this, that, I think a lot of Charrington's moves in the offseason signified that they were going to go with a more defensive approach to the season this year, because they realized they really don't have a ton of power when it comes to the offense. They added a guy like Jared Dyson, who is a fairly good defensive player. They kept Jacob Stallings. They didn't go out and make any moves at the catcher position. And I think they realized, without Ty on this year, and obviously they didn't foresee the Archer injury coming, but they don't necessarily have the kind of pitching depth that you'd like going into a season. So having somebody like Stallings behind the plate to frame pitches and, hopefully get a couple more strike calls than you typically would with a depleted staff is going to play very important when it comes to the season.
Sure. So I guess what we're looking at is a Newman, Frazier, Reynolds, Bell, top of the order. Stallings will probably be thrown in there 7th or 8th. Now that we've talked through it, I actually don't hate that too much. I really like the top there with Newman, Frazier, Reynolds, Bell. I think that can compete with a lot of different lineups. At least in our division, in the American League division, we'll be playing in. Sitting here watching the Dodgers, and it certainly doesn't compete with them, but neither does our payroll. Cody, do you find it as hard as I do to root for Jacob Stallings just because how bad his dad was coaching Pitt?
Oh, I mean, it was a complete disaster. And I think that's why a lot of people have a negative opinion on Stallings. I just, hopefully he's a little bit more of a, to borrow Buzz Williams's phrase, more of a baseball savant than Kevin was a basketball savant.
I just find it so difficult to root for that family, but I guess I can come around if he starts hitting the ball.
Good stuff, guys. That's, to be honest with you, baseball, I've been looking at the lineups and stuff, and when I think of names that are, supposed to be popping out to me, of course, you see Josh Bell, you see Adam Frazier, Brian Reynolds had a great year last year. But, for me, as someone who's not as familiar with the Pirates and with baseball in general, it is always kind of eye-turning to see a player not named Francisco Cervelli in that catcher position. You guys, I want to know about this catchers duo that you guys have going on here with Stallings and John Ryan Murphy. Can they get it done?
Sure, I think I might have a take that will be very controversial in Pittsburgh, but I think the two most overrated players in Pirates history, maybe not Pirates history, but since I've been a fan, are Francisco Cervelli and Andrew McCutchen. I think Cervelli, everyone fell in love with his personality. He was a catcher sort of like closers, where catchers and closers will be good for 1 or 2 years and then they'll fall off. I think Cervelli was one of those. And as much as I loved Andrew McCutchen when he was on the team, the backlash that they got for trading him when he has fallen so far off the mountain that he was on, I just will never get over the type of reaction that people had for that trade. So it makes me almost root for McCutchen not to play well, just to prove that that trade was the right trade, because ultimately with Brian Reynolds as part of the return, it was. So just, I always group those two guys together as people that their personalities are incredible. They're amazing people, but they were not as good as Willie Stargell and Roberto Clemente, which I think a lot of Pirate fans think they were.
Yeah, I don't want to go as far as saying that McCutchen was overrated. Just for the fact that he did, he has fallen off, and I do agree that I think the trade was the right decision. He certainly was never going to play again at the level that he had when he won his MVP and when he was consistently finishing, top 3 in voting every year. But I do agree that, at the end of the day, McCutchen was beginning a decline. And, as much as people wanted to rip the return at the time, it's hard to do that now when you consider that Brian Reynolds has turned out to be what he is. And even Kyle Crick, I mean, he's struggled, ever since like towards the late end of last year. He was struggling, and he's obviously not had a great camp to start this season. But, the overall scope, they got 2 guys back that, have contributed to this specific core. Not that this specific core has done anything of any relevancy to this point, but they are guys that can contribute, and on a winning team would be nice pieces to have, especially if Kyle Crick can kind of regain that form that he had, prior to pretty much. I mean, it seemed like once the whole Felipe Vasquez situation happened and Kyle Crick became the 9th inning guy, that seemed to be the beginning of the downfall that Crick's been on. So hopefully maybe he can find that ground that he was at before and end up, becoming an important part of this team, especially with Keone Kela still hasn't shown up to camp because he's, I think they just announced that he got COVID. He got tested for COVID and he was positive. So, Crick's probably your 9th inning guy right now. And it would be nice to have him back to that form that he was at before. But I do agree, certainly, that, that Kutch trade ended up working out really well for them. And, as far as the Cervelli thing, like you said, I was a big Cervelli guy. Certainly was a great guy. But again, he was never really anything special, I think, on the baseball field. He did have his moments. Nobody, you know, he was an infectious personality, and I think that really went well with the pitchers. But, I mean, going back on the whole, the catchers duo between Stallings and John Ryan Murphy, certainly the names are very underwhelming. It's not a sexy group in terms of name recognition, but I think what you're going to get is, like I said, a solid season out of Stallings. I don't really know what you're going to get out of John Ryan Murphy. I'm not expecting much. I know before the break, I think before the COVID outbreak happened and everything got shut down, I'm pretty sure he led the Pirates in spring training home runs, which, balls seem to fly out a little bit more in spring training, especially with, teams and pitchers getting back to acclimated. And, hitting probably has the advantage early on in spring training just because the pitchers aren't back in tune yet. But I think you're going to get maybe a very average, overall output from the catchers duo. I'm not expecting anything too high out of either of them. Like I said, I am a little higher on Stallings than most, but he's still offensively. You're not going to get anything more than maybe over the course of 60 games, maybe he pops 3 to 5 home runs and hits in the 240, 260 range. But that's my thoughts on that whole catcher situation.
Yeah, when I say Andrew McCutcheon and Francisco Cervelli are overrated, that's not to take away that they were good players. I think, related to that, when Bryce Harper was being talked about having a $500 million contract at $500 million, I think even guys like Bryce Harper can be overrated in that respect. It's not so much they're not talented, it's that people see some of these athletes as gods and they just don't live up to that. So just wanted to clarify that. I thought Kutch was a great player. Just the reaction to his trade was as if we made the same trade that the Red Sox did when they traded Babe Ruth. But you talked about Kyle Crick jumping into the bullpen. I'm actually really, really high on Nick Burdi. When he was pitching last year, he was extremely effective. I love his stuff. He has just some nasty off-speed pitches, gets a lot of strikeouts, and then he blew out his bicep in a very scary injury. But I think Nick Burdi will slot right into that closer role eventually if Kela cannot battle this COVID-19. I know we saw with Freddie Freeman, it took him quite a while, and he says he still feels some of the effects. So I would actually like to see, as I like Kyle Crick as an eighth inning guy, but I would really like to see Nick Burdi sliding into that closer role.
Awesome, guys. Let's move on to pitching. This is an area that, we've heard so many times over the years that, and not just for the Pirates, but for a lot of teams, for some reason, I've always heard this about the Milwaukee Brewers and the Colorado Rockies, is that teams just have such a good outfield and infield, but when it comes to the pitching, that's kind of the final piece of the puzzle that is missing. So there are some pitchers of note who are not in the rotation, including Archer and Taillon, and of course, you've got some returning players and some names like Musgrove, Williams, Keller, Brault, Holland, and Chad Kuhl. What can you tell me about these guys? Who are you looking forward to seeing? And, who do you think is going to be the dominant pitcher out of these list of names?
So if we were looking at a 162-game season, I would be very worried about this pitching staff. We have a pitching staff that was not good at the end of last year. I'd even say from June on, it was not very good. And you're missing your ace, Jamison Taillon, and you're missing a very serviceable, has not lived up to his trade return, but a very serviceable Chris Archer. However, with the 60-game season, I see a lot of guys in our rotation who started off very well last year. All of April was dominant by our starting pitching staff. And if they can turn in a full month of dominant starting pitching, you're halfway through the 60-game season. So if it weren't for the shortened season, I'd be worried. But because we have the shortened season, I'm a little more optimistic about how this pitching staff will pitch.
Yeah, certainly. And I think when you look at, I like Joe Musgrove. And I think we all can agree that, Trevor Williams and Joe Musgrove being our 1 and 2, like you said, over the course of a 60-game season, will probably play a lot better than it would over the course of 162 games. I think we can also agree that on a regular good team, you would prefer to have Musgrove and Williams as probably your middle of the rotation guys and not necessarily your stalwart horses. But there is the potential, like Mitch Keller. I think when you look at some of the more advanced stats on Mitch Keller last year, he got very unlucky. I think that he really had a lot of dominant performances. I mean, he had some 8 and 9, 10 strikeout games where he still gave up 4 and 5 runs. When you look at the overall scope, I mean, strikeouts are they're a good indicator of what a guy's got that day. If you're going out there and you don't have your best stuff, you might have 3 or 4 strikeouts, and you give up maybe 4 or 5 runs just because your stuff's not that sharp that day. But it seemed like a lot of the times when Keller pitched last year, he was a guy that he saw a lot of unlucky breaks. Teams, he would get 9, 10 strikeouts a game, but still give up a lot of runs because his batting average on balls in play was up a lot higher than a lot of pitchers. And I think that Mitch Keller has the potential to be an ace of a staff. He's obviously not there yet. And, so that's your top 3. And then you look at the back end of your rotation. You got a guy like Derek Holland, who I'm not too high on. I think that it was one of those things. It's a reclamation project like the Pirates have been acclimated to doing over the past 7 or 8 seasons. And obviously, you're gonna have to. They had to fill out some space. And over the course of a 60-game season, Holland might be able to get you, I don't know, a couple wins here and there, but I don't see him being much of an impact. I actually believe that I think Chad Cole will end up in this rotation at some point. I know Shelton did mention that he was thinking about piggybacking between Brault and Cole potentially to try to keep both fresh, because I think that Chad Cole is one of those guys who pitches better in lower volume, and I think he's proven that over the couple seasons that he's pitched, where he's very effective at times as a starter, but I think his stuff would play really well if you use him in a role where maybe your starter only goes 3 or 4 innings, and then Chad Cole can come in for 2 or 3, bridge that gap to the back end of the bullpen. And, when his curveball is very sharp and, all his secondary pitches, along with the fastball that plays pretty well, I think that is a very intriguing situation over a 60-game season.
Yeah, I think in an era where middle relievers aren't being treated anymore like, okay, we're down 8-0, we need a guy who's going to last 4 innings. Instead, they can actually be effective and help us win games after maybe our starter only goes 4 and hits his pitch count. I think it's perfect time for a guy like Stephen Brault or Chad Cole. I agree with you how they're very effective in their first couple of innings. And this is the era, if they were going to be effective, this is the era for them. I think in a 60-game situation, we could not have, panned out any better. I think anytime you get a weird season is when you can get some people like the Pirates, the Marlins, the Royals, the bottom of the barrel teams that, let's face it, we were in a 162-game season, we just weren't going to compete, especially in the NL Central. But when you have a season that's less than half of what you usually play, that's when teams can really come out of nowhere. And we can roll this into a discussion about the new news we got today, a 16-team playoff. I personally don't like it. I came into this season already feeling like a World Series championship would not mean as much. 60 games in baseball does not prove enough, with the Nationals last year being, I think, 19-31 after 50 games and then winning the World Series. I think a 16-game playoff just more minimizes the impact of what a World Series would mean this year. More than half the teams are making the playoffs, and I think it'd be pretty funny if they still celebrate playoff bursts in baseball with champagne this year, with over half the league and possibly teams under 500 making the playoffs. So where it could really work out for the Pirates, and I'll be excited to watch as many games as the Pirates want to play, I think it's kind of silly to expand it to 16 teams.
Yeah, I'll play devil's advocate there. I'm not 100% for it. Obviously, it heightens every team's chances to make the playoffs now. And like you said, it's going to be a watered down field, especially if a team over the course of 60 games, like, the Pirates or even the Tigers or somebody that's more of a bottom barrel team gets hot over the course of a 3 or 4 week span. Now you're looking at, a team like that making the playoffs where they obviously don't deserve it. But I think the thing I do want to say is if there was ever a time to experiment, and I think this goes for all the leagues, with different playoff scenarios, with different lengths to the season, I think it's this one. Obviously, you're not going to get a normal season. That's been proven. The world just isn't normal right now with everything going on. And I think it's pretty awesome that they're at least trying something different. I am one of the people who is fine with 162 games, and I think a lot of traditionalists are. But, on the other side of that, I think, and a lot like the NBA and the NHL does, 81 to 82 games, like you would cut the season in half, it would make for exciting baseball. I think it would give a lot more purpose to games in the middle months of the season. I think a lot of people tune out, especially if their team's not good. I think it's hard to really keep up with a team, in the dog days of summer through the end of July through August, because it's not that the games aren't meaningful, but the season's almost determined to that point. You're going to have your teams like the Dodgers, the Yankees. Those teams are going to be way out ahead in their division, and the other teams really don't have much to play for. I mean, you have obviously your wild card battles, and the Pirates over the last couple of seasons have actually been in the race towards the end of the season, and it made for some exciting baseball. But at the end of the day, I think, I agree that, 60 games isn't enough to really prove what a team is actually made of, because as you said, a 3 or 4 week span could really put you into a playoff spot, especially with 16 teams making the playoffs now. But I think that, if baseball, and another problem is baseball's marketing right now is terrible. I mean, when you consider the fact that there was a study I saw a couple weeks ago, I'm not sure where it was from, and I don't know how many people were asked, but the percentage of people who were able to identify who Mike Trout was, I think, was 48%. When the best player of a generation is hardly identifiable, that's a problem. And I think a lot of that is because of the extreme length of the season. And I think a lot of people tune out, like I said, later in the season, and it's hard for baseball to generate a lot of new fans, because I think that a lot of people see the season as way too long. You look at a league like the NFL, 16 games, it's over the course of a 3 or 4 month span. Every Sunday people tune in because every game matters. It's not necessarily, I won't say every game matters in the NHL and the NBA, but when you compare 82 games to 162, it's kind of hard to say that the games in late July after the All-Star break, early August, really mean anything when a 2-week losing streak really doesn't put you out of contention. I mean, the Pirates went on about a month-long losing streak last year in August, and I think that especially really tuned a lot of fans out. And I think that at the end of the day, baseball would be best served trying a new thing, and they don't have to change 162 games. I personally am a fan of the 162 game season. I'm a big baseball fan, but I think to appeal new fans, they would be best off maybe shortening the season even to 100 games. I think that's still a reasonable length, and I think it would definitely help generate a new fan base, especially with the influx of new young talent that's in the league now. I mean, you have guys like Ronald Acuna, you have guys like Juan Soto, you have all these young guys that, kids who are just getting into, their early like 10, 11, 12 ages of their life could really gravitate towards those guys. And I think that they need to do everything they can to start marketing the game better. And I think maybe making the game a little bit more of a sprint than a marathon would actually help the sport.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you. They could maybe slim it down to even just 150. I not so much because I think the season takes too long. I know for some fans it does. I hate when the World Series is played in bad weather, especially cold weather. You get 5 months of the season, regular season, where it doesn't, it's beautiful weather, it's sunshine, and then you have the most important 7-game series of the year played in snow. That makes zero sense to me. So I would be all for shortening the season if it made for nicer weather with the World Series. I also don't know why you have to play your division 17 times each. It's boring for the fans. I'm tired of seeing the Cubs at PNC Park. I'm tired of seeing Cubs fans at PNC Park. How many times a year? I don't need it. I don't need to see Cardinals fans. I don't need to see Cubs fans. I don't need to see those same guys over and over again. I would love to see Mike Trout every year. I don't know why we don't play every American League division every year. I mean, that's why people don't know Mike Trout. Before I got MLB Live with my season ticket package for free, I was thinking about buying just the Angels so I could see Mike Trout and I could see Shohei Ohtani. How am I sitting here and not seeing those guys in 2020? It's outrageous that they haven't figured this out, how to get the best players in front of half of the country. I agree. Baseball is terrible at marketing, but they're also terrible with the way that they make their schedule. I mean, we don't go years as far as Steeler fans without seeing the best stars. A, because they have a better TV situation, and B, you play a lot of those teams year after year. Baseball has a lot to fix. I'm happy with a shortened season. I'm not happy with a 60-game season, but I'm glad they're trying. Let's see if it works this year, and if it does, maybe they'll knock it down to maybe 150. But I think we saw with all the negotiations, even in a pandemic with the owners, that they're not going to give up any sort of money, and they might even make it an 180-game season. So.
Yeah, well, that would definitely be a little bit interesting. I know CBA talks are something that we all have paid attention to for sure. I might not be the most well-versed when it comes to baseball, hockey, and whatnot, but I've been very interested in the CBA and seeing just how, I guess reluctant is a good word. Reluctant the owners were to just give up really anything. It is crazy. And I come from a world where, with the NWSL, the collaboration between the Players Association and the league was just absolutely phenomenal. And give credit to MLS, USL, and the NHL as well. They really got it done when they needed to, and were able to get not just good accommodations for their teams and their players, but just kind of make the attitude about it players first, which is super, super important when you're asking them to, leave their families and whatnot, and they've got like 10,000 things on their mind. But let's move on. Let's preview the NL Central. You guys have a couple notes in here about the Reds, quote unquote, winning the offseason. Can Christian Yelich carry the Brewers? And are the Cardinals and Cubs always a threat, and why they are? Can you guys, walk us through this and what you think about the NL Central? The floor is yours.
Cody, if you want to take that, I know you put some of those notes on the document.
Yeah, so I think, when you look at the overall scope of the NL Central, everybody agrees that I think the Reds did a lot this offseason to shore up their team. They gave Mike Moustakas a big contract. They signed Shogo Akiyama, who was a Japanese star that has come over to the MLB. So they have some high hopes for him to potentially be a piece in their outfield this season. They have Nick Castellanos, they signed Wade Miley, and then they made the Trevor Bauer trade last year, which I think surprised a lot of people. They're going to be, I think, a good team this year. I'm hesitant to really anoint them the NL Central champs because we've seen it time and time again that teams who quote unquote win the offseason don't always actually end up panning out. It's
the Cleveland Browns every year in the NFL.
Great example, yeah. Both Ohio teams, so there's a lot of similarities there, but they do have a nice little core. I mean, they've got Joey Votto, who's certainly towards the end of his career, but he's still a guy that you can rely on to hit the ball rather well. He might not have the same pop he had, but he's still just a great seeing ball kind of hitter. And you have guys like Jesse Winker, Nick Senzel, who are younger on their team. They're building a nice little mini core. Like I said, I don't know that they're going to jump right into contention this year. I think, especially with a 16-team field now, I think Cincinnati definitely makes the playoffs. I still think they would have in a what was it, a 10-game or 10-team playoff format that they were going to do before. Yep. I think they would have snuck in. But I think now they're definitely going to make it.
So who do you have winning the Central? If you had to put your money on it right now.
I always go back to them. The Cardinals always find a way. Their pitching staff with, Jack Flaherty's going to be one of the best young pitchers in baseball for the next, decade. They've got guys like Wainwright, Dakota Hudson, Miles Michaelis. They're not a ton of sexy names, but they always find a way. I mean, it seems like they are the team that, they always, even if they don't have the best farm system, it seems like anytime they plug and play these guys, they turn out to just be stars. And, I think Matt Carpenter's a great example. I mean, before he came to St. Louis, he was a very unrecognizable name. And, after a couple seasons there, he really just ingratiated himself there and became I don't want to say one of the best players in baseball, but he's certainly a guy that he's a threat. They just, every time it seems like they find guys that they can plug and play, and they always end up working out. And personally, it's hard for me to ever bet against St. Louis.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd love to put the Brew Crew up against you. I don't know what it is about Christian Yelich. Maybe it's because I'm a Barstool fan, but I lean towards the Brew Crew when we're talking about the NL Central aside from the Pirates. I'll always hate the Reds because of the Chapman years beating McCutchen. I'll hate the Cardinals just because they're the Cardinals. I'll hate the Cubs because they went from the lovable cursed losers to the most obnoxious team in the league. So I always turn to the Brew Crew if the Pirates aren't going to win it. But their pitching just is still bad. I mean, I don't know how you continue to go into the season with Brandon Woodruff as your ace. If he's the ones, I mean, their pitching staff is just never good. And I don't know what about their offseason or their GM always leads them to believe that they're going to have a pitching staff that comes into the year that's going to be able to compete with the best of the best when it comes to any sort of series in the playoffs. Maybe if it was football and you have to win one game in the playoffs, you can get by with a dominant offensive lineup. But baseball is always going to be some sort of series to win the World Series. And they will just never have the pitching to do it. They've shown it time and time again. So I'd be comfortable with you saying the Cardinals. I think it's just a powerful division that I'm more so looking forward to the Pirates playing the American League side of what this division is going to be, certainly, than what the National League side is. That's going to be the Indians, the Twins, the Tigers, the Royals, and the White Sox. the Indians, the White Sox, and the Twins are pretty good teams to watch. We don't get to see a lot of them being on the American League side. So I'm really just looking forward to seeing some of those teams. The White Sox have a really good lineup. Talk about winners of the offseason. They made a ton of moves this past offseason. But just talk a little bit about, Cody, if you could, some of the excitement of seeing the AL Central, since we'll be seeing 20 games of them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like you said, it gets tiresome watching the same teams over and over again. And, when you look at the overall scope of the NL Central, it's kind of just, it's really bland. We see the same teams over and over, and to see, the Indians this season, and to see, obviously we have the Tigers too, which is another team that's kind of on the same path as the Pirates. I like their minor league system a little bit more than what the Pirates have right now. So I think they have a better future, but they're kind of in the same boat as we are right now. The Twins, I think, are a team that are right there. I think they're just as much of a threat to win the World Series as any other team. The Royals and whatever. The White Sox, again, another team that is maybe not necessarily on the precipice of winning a World Series, but I think they're a young, exciting team, and one of the teams in baseball that I don't want to compare them to the Astros, but I know a lot of people say, back in, what was it, like 2012, the Astros had that just dominant minor league system, and it seems like the White Sox, have that with guys like, Yoan Moncada, and Michael Kopech, if he ever turns out to be what he could be. I mean, I know he's going to miss this. He opted out of the season, so he's not going to play this year. But yeah,
Luis for Robert, potential Rookie of the Year there.
And they have guys that the AL Central is going to be a fun division to see those kind of teams. And it's going to be it's awful to think that how many games are we playing against NL Central teams this year? Is it like 10, I think, a piece?
I believe it's 40 against your division and 20 against the American League side, so that would come out to be 4 each against those teams. So
you're essentially playing 60% of your schedule against division teams.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely going to decide your division. Whether or not that's necessarily exciting, I mean, that's up to the fan. But to me, and I get it, it's a pandemic season. They have to limit travel as best as they can, and that's why they have to kind of limit. You're going to play your division, and then the opposite division in the opposite league. You can't have a ton of travel, and I understand that. But in an overall season, like you said before, I don't see why you can't have the Pirates playing the Angels more often and seeing Mike Trout. I mean, it's already tough enough for they're on the West Coast, so they play a lot of 10 o'clock games here, and those 10 o'clock games end at 1 o'clock, and for, our time on the East Coast, and you aren't necessarily going to have a ton of people thrilled with. I know I'm not a big fan of when the Pirates head out to the West Coast. Especially if you work the next morning, it's tough to stay up for a July game against a West Coast team that, in the overall scope of the season, probably won't mean a darn thing. So, like I said,
right. I mean, if I wasn't working from home tomorrow, I wouldn't be watching this Dodgers-Giants game right
exactly.
now. It took COVID to get me to watch 2 West Coast teams play against each other.
Exactly. So, like I said, the AL Central is going to be it's going to be fun to play those teams, and just hopefully, and like I said, especially with, most of our games coming against our division, it's a bleak outlook for the Pirates. I think the Cardinals they just have much better pitching. I think they're going to dominate the Pirates. The Cubs, with their core of players, The Pirates, I think, are by far right now with this constructed roster the worst team by far in the division. I know it's such a pessimistic look, but it's really hard to get excited when you consider that Guillermo Heredia is probably your opening day right fielder. I think it's a big hole in the lineup. I know obviously Gregory Polanco would be the right fielder in if he hadn't contracted the virus, but it's so hard to get, excited for this team when your closer is already on the injured list. Your starting right fielder is on the injured list. A top prospect in your system and Brian Hayes is on the injured list because of COVID. The Pirates, not that the Pirates have great names, but I think when you look at the overall scope, the Pirates have been hit pretty hard just because they're missing integral pieces of their team. You could make the argument probably wouldn't be as important to other teams, but when the Pirates are in such a situation, it's hard to really be excited when you're losing three guys that could have had a significant impact on your upcoming season.
Yeah, good points, guys, all around. Obviously, I don't have too much to input. I am a Brewers fan by default, so that's my answer. So that's
Rachel,
what I'm going to go with.
I don't know what else we have on the agenda, but I'd love to throw some stuff in on the fly.
Of course, go for it.
Cody, do you get into the baseball betting as much as I do, or even just sports gambling?
Well, I just turned 21, so I've started to dabble a little bit. I haven't had a ton of success, so I'm probably not the best source, but I'll let you take most of that, and I'll kind of piggyback off what you're saying.
Sure. So a couple futures I really like. I think this is, if any, a year to just bet all of the maybe 5 to 10 worst odds. I think if there's ever a year where one of those bottom 5 to 10 teams is going to win the World Series, this is going to be the year they're going to do it. It's a really weird year. I also, when I'm looking at different money lines and things like that, I think pitching plays a huge role. At least when I'm looking at the different types of models that I try to run, I give the most value to whether you have a good pitcher and whether you have a good bullpen. It seems to really pay off in the end. Typically, I weigh home and away a little bit. I do not think that'll play any value this year with no fans. Maybe a quarter of value to anything else, with potentially the Red Sox being able to play the Green Monster better, potentially Pirates center fielders be able to play the notch a little better. But if I were to give any tips from what I saw last year, it seemed like if you had the better starting pitcher, you tended to win the game. Also, it seemed that left-handed starters won a lot of games last year. I would make that as a tip. If you have a better starter, especially if he's left-handed versus a right-handed starter who's a little worse, I bet those money lines a lot, and it seemed to really hit. With baseball, with the run lines typically being 1.5 or less, you want to really find value in some money lines. How you do that is you would think if you would typically, all right, I would typically take this team at minus 200 and they're sitting at a minus 110, bet that. It doesn't matter if you think they're going to win in baseball. It's all about getting value at the money lines. And that's how I've been able to bet it. I was thinking, Cody, just throw something interesting in here. Maybe we could look at the different divisions. We could each pick a winner of the divisions, and we could each pick a World Series champion. And let's say 2 points for each division winner, 5 points for World Series winner. And we could come up with some sort of punishment in a later podcast, just to add some fun to the end of the podcast as we get rolling into baseball.
Yeah, I'm cool with that. I will add one more thing before we go into that. I did go on to FanDuel the other day. I did take one futures bet. I looked into who's going to hit the most home runs in the NL this season, and I saw a lot of value in Cody Bellinger at plus 1,700. I think that is certainly somebody who could easily, with such a sweet swing, lead the league in home runs. There's a guy like Juan Soto now is going to miss a lot of time, so that's, I think, another threat to his crown that could end up, he's going to miss some time. So that's another help to Bellinger's case. Obviously, you'll have guys like, his own teammate Mookie Betts. You've got Christian Yelich. I mean, there's some power in the NL, but I think there's a lot of value in that plus 1,700 for Cody Bellinger.
I would agree.
And I want you both to know that I'm documenting your picks here, so I will be keeping track of this.
That sounds great. I think we're approaching the hour mark, so if we wanted to jump into it, I think we should start with the AL East.
Sure. Yeah, I think the Yankees probably are the clear favorite there. There's just so much that they're just with the Garrett Cole signing, that really put them over the top. And that lineup, you consider a 60-game season if Judge and Stanton both stay healthy. I mean, that's as close to a murderer's row as you can get hitting the baseball. And I think it's still going to be a competitive division. I think the Blue Jays in a 60-game season are going to be really exciting with all the young talent they have. But I just don't see any team in that division upsetting the Yankees.
Well, I think Dr. Fauci has a better chance of starting for the Washington Nationals than Judge and Stanton have staying healthy.
That's true.
I got to agree with you. I'm going to go with the Yankees in the AL East. So next would be the AL Central.
I'm going to take the Twins. They were very close to, really putting it all together last year and, even getting to the World Series. The additions that they've made and the overall scope of the team, they're just really deep. I think, like I said, it's going to be a fun division to watch with the White Sox too. I still think the White Sox are a little bit too young to really make a push, but as you said, anything can happen in a shortened season. But I'm going to go ahead and take the Twins there.
162-game season, I'm going with the Indians or the Twins. 60-game season, I'm going with the White Sox. I love their lineup. Lucas Giolito in the rotation, 1 year older. Luis Robert, I'm taking him as my AL Rookie of the Year. I'm going with the White Sox in the Central. AL West.
I've got the Angels. I know it's hard to bet against the Astros in that division, and I have a feeling that's probably who you're going to take. But the addition of Rendon really intrigues me. If they get a full season of Ohtani, I really like that. I mean, the pitching isn't quite there yet for them, and I know it's a big pitching league, but that offense is just too potent, and I just have a good feeling about them this year.
I like the Angels a lot, especially everything you touched on: Rendon, Trout, Ohtani, pitcher and batter.
Mm-hmm.
He's obviously very good. And I'm curious to see the Astros when they don't know what pitch is coming.
Yeah.
I don't know how often they're using the trash can. I still find it crazy they were using a trash can in 2020. But I'm also going to go with the Angels. I like them too much.
You guys have agreed
lineup
twice now. Come on. Come on.
Well, I had Rendon on my fantasy team last year, and he pretty much brought me into the playoffs. He is just an absolute terror in the lineup with a lineup that already has, in my opinion, the best baseball player to ever play. So I got to go with the Angels, and I hope if I continue to work from home, I get to watch a lot more of their games than I ever have before.
I'm going to let you go first for the National League here.
Great. NL East. The hardest of all the divisions. Nationals, Braves, Mets, Phillies. It's similar to the Central. You got 4 teams that could definitely compete for the division with a lousy team at the bottom. And I know with a blog called Pittsburgh Sports Castle, it stinks to compare the Marlins to the Pirates, but that's just the nature of the beast at this point. I'm going to go with the Braves. I like the Braves a lot. I like Max Fried. I think he's a really good ace, especially 1 year older. I know they lost Donaldson over to the Twins, but I still think the Braves, with everyone getting 1 year older, will take that division.
I'm going to go with the team that's probably the least likely of those 4 to win. I'm going to take the Phillies. 1, just to be a little bit different so that we're not completely matched up. And 2, I've always been a big Aaron Nola guy. Last year was a bit of a disappointment for him, but I think he's another just bright young star in the game if he really can figure everything out. And, going into last year, they were another team that, everybody penciled in as the team that kind of won the offseason. And, obviously, McCutchen ended up getting hurt, and Nola had a disappointing season. But I really like JT Realmuto. I think he's the best catcher offensively in baseball. And, that makes a big difference in a lineup when you consider that a lot of catchers just aren't really, offensive threats, with Pop anymore. And I think that when you consider, the Mets rotation's obviously always going to be spearheaded by DeGrom, and they're a really solid team. The Braves are just astronomically young and good, and they're going to be one of the more fun teams to watch in the entire league. Obviously, the Nationals, coming off a World Series championship, are going to be a good team even without Rendon. But I'm going to go ahead and take the Phillies just to be a little bit different.
I think we should A, save the Central for last, and B, I think the NL West is going to be a little boring for both of us. I just got to go with the Dodgers. I'm looking at their lineup on my TV right now, and I've never lived in a season of baseball with a better lineup. I'm sure Yankee fans probably have, older Yankee fans, but I have not. And even with Kershaw going down, I mean, they still have Buehler, who would be an ace on any other team. So I got to go with the Dodgers.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with that. I think the only other team that has a chance to upset the apple cart in that division is really the Padres. The Rockies are good too, but I like the Padres' depth and everything. They're a much better team than I think nationally percepted, but it's kind of hard to, like you said, bet against this Dodgers lineup. I mean, it would honestly take 2 or 3 injuries for them to even have to worry about any sort of slump I think that the team would go into. They're just head and shoulders, I think, above everybody else in that division.
They probably have starters for some teams not even playing because of the way the minor league system is set up this year. I mean, it's unbelievable the depth they have.
Mm-hmm.
Kershaw went down, and they were able to put May right on the mound without blinking an eye.
Certainly helps to have that.
Now we jump into the most important division, the NL Central. I'm going to go with it again to win the division. Will not pick them to win the World Series because of pitching, but I talked a lot about the Brewers. They have the hitting. They do not have the pitching to win the World Series, in my opinion, but they do have the hitting to at least win the division. I'm going to go with the Brewers.
Yeah, and like I touched on earlier, I think I'm going to go with St. Louis. Obviously the Pirates are going to be a huge threat to them in that division, and I think they're going to finish, maybe 1 or 2 games behind, the eventual division champions in the Cardinals. But realistically speaking, I think that the Cardinals have the deepest rotation in the division, and like I said before, they always find a way to plug and play these guys that, you wouldn't necessarily suspect to be, big time threats, but they put together a lineup every year that just seems to kind of outplay their projection, and they're just such a well-run organization that I think they're going to end up coming out on top of that division.
Yeah, I mean, if Pirates fans remember, Michael Wacha was a plug-and-play.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was not well-known in game.
Yeah,
I mean, we went into that game 4. I thought the Pirates had that series.
Yeah, and he hit them.
Yeah, I did not expect them to win Game 3. When we won Game 3, I thought we had that series. Yeah. And then the only one who could get past Wacha was Alvarez with that solo shot. Morton pitched fantastic that day, and it just wasn't enough. Speaking of Morton, I'll jump ahead to my World Series pick. Because it's such a strange year, I think someone who just happens to squeeze into the playoffs could potentially win this wild new playoff format. I'm going with the Rays. I don't know if I'm a little biased because I have family who lives in Florida. I've always liked the Rays. They're basically the second Pittsburgh at this point with Meadows and Glasnow and Charlie Morton. But I just really like the Rays this year. I like them betting wise. I think I got them at plus 1,100. I'm not sure what they're at now. But I like the Rays a lot to win the World Series. I think when they catch fire, they really catch fire. And they could be that special team to get hot at the end and take the World Series.
Do you want to say who you think they're going to play against in the National League?
I think they could potentially play against the NL East winning Braves.
All right, I was going to say I think the Braves make the World Series. I agree with you on that point. However, I don't think they win. It's such a
I think I know where you're going.
To bet against the Yankees just seems like a very hard thing to do. I just find it really hard to believe that I think even a 60-game season makes it all the more reason that, you're going to see Garrett Cole pitch. What? He'll have 12 starts this year. That accounts for, a big chunk of a 60-game season. And then you get into the playoffs, and it's just a murderer's row lineup. They have the pitching staff. It's such a cop-out pick, but at the end of the day, I just don't think that there's going to be a team, and hopefully, for the sake of dynasty purposes, we don't see them win continually over the next, 10 years. But I'm hoping, for the sake of this, that it's Yankees Braves and the Yankees end up pulling out. I could definitely see the Braves making that a series. They have a great young pitching staff, and the lineup is just, with guys like Acuna, guys like Freeman, guys like with the second baseman, Albies, couldn't think of his name. But they're a fun lineup, and I could totally see that being one of the better World Series matchups in the past couple of years if that were to happen.
Honestly, I'm glad you picked them just for the sake of credibility for this podcast. I would have absolutely picked them if I didn't. It'd be like picking Duke to win the national championship in basketball. It'd be like picking Ohio State to win the national championship in football. I just can't do it. I cannot pick the Yankees. I should. I picked them to win the division. That's as far as I can go. I can't go any further than that. I just cannot do it.
And like you said, in a shortened season, I mean, anything can happen. The Yankees could, Garrett Cole could go down to injury. Judge and Stanton are almost guaranteed to go down to injury. It's just about the timing, and, if it would happen in the playoffs, they're obviously a much less credible team at that point. But, like you said, anything can happen. The Rays are certainly a great pick. That's going to be a lot of fun, and I think that's a team that, the Pirates, I think, have tried to mimic their strategy with the whole trying to maximize I want to say, I think they've tried to maximize what they could with a smaller payroll and getting guys who aren't necessarily your top-end free agents, but guys that you can, you could rely on to plug in, and they end up doing well. And they've got a great pitching staff. Obviously, they have two of what would have been a great core for the Pirates in Tyler Glasnow, who obviously faltered here, but, in Austin Meadows. So there's a lot of potential for the Rays as well, and I definitely think that a Rays-Braves World Series would be a heck of a thing to watch.
Yeah, if anyone will get an oblique injury from COVID-19, it'll be Judge or Stanton. I know that's not a symptom just yet, but they could be the first two with how their careers have trended. So.
Definitely.
Well, guys, we had 3 of the same picks and 3 of not the same picks, and then you guys had 2 different winners. So all in all, good job. I have the official tally here, and we will certainly match that up when the time comes. And I'm intrigued to hear your guys' ideas of punishments. That should be interesting.
We'll discuss them over the next couple of days, and hopefully the next podcast will give you guys an update on what we're planning on doing.
Yes,
we'll come up with a few options and put it to a Twitter poll.
Absolutely.
Since yes. Twitter polls decide everything in this nation anymore, so we might as well put it up to that.
Oh, the age of social media. Well, thanks, guys, for joining us tonight. This was a really good show. You guys can follow us on Twitter at Pittsburgh Sports Castle, PGH Sports Castle. My bad. I'm so used to just saying the full name. Cody has a outlet called Let's Talk Pit. You can follow that, 1T, not 2. You can follow me at Rachael Kriger. You can follow Cody at Cody_625. And then follow Antonio at Antonio_7793. Going to give a special shout out to Antonio, who just got engaged, which is very exciting. So your fiance is now officially part of the Pittsburgh Sports Castle family, with no ties to any sort of commitment whatsoever, except for to you.
I'll let her know.
She's part of the group now.
She'll be thrilled.
Maybe she can be involved with brainstorming a sort of punishment, if you will.
Sure. Yep.
But folks, we are on all major platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and be sure to check us out by searching our name. We are also on Google Podcasts, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Podchaser, and of course Spreaker, where we record our shows. If you ever have any ideas for podcast prompts and topics, feel free to reach out to members of our team and the Pittsburgh Sports Castle Twitter to send some ideas along. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time.